Finest Newborn Jr. Was one of the greatest pianists of the 20th century as we approach the millennium. And his admirers, of course, were as diverse as Andre Previn, Oscar Peterson, Andre Watts. You could go right down to Kenny Barron, and you see the influence heavily in people like Jeff Keys and Eric Reed, Benny Green, so on and so forth. And certainly all of us. Harold knew him in his earlier years. Donald Mulgrew and I got a chance to know him during basically the last 15, 17 years of his life to some degree. And unfortunately, Jeff never got a chance to know him, but when I first exposed Jeff to his music, has really helped crystallize his style of playing. And when you hear that, the very orchestral approach to the instrument, that's a direct influence from Finest's playing.
I think if you're a jazz pianist and you have to, at some point, if you're really in touch with the music, you have to be exposed to Phineas Newman. And if you're into the concept of swinging, playing the blues, you gotta go through Phineas Newman. So, but it's weird. I don't know. I guess I was in Knoxville and I just did an interview last night, and I was just telling some people the same thing, that I feel very fortunate in the fact that when I first started learning to play jazz in 1972, I met James Williams at Memphis State, and he was my mentor and still is. I still learn so much from him. But it was a great time to be growing up in Memphis, and a great time to be learning jazz, not only because there were such great players like James and Bill Mobley on the scene, but Phineas was performing a lot, during that time, at a little local club, and the chance to go hear him sometimes once or two nights a week was just, twice a week was just incredible. And you can imagine the impact that it had on me as a young player, not only just learning to play the piano, but just being exposed to jazz.
All heart. That's Antonio. I was fortunate enough to be his teacher at Queens College, where he got his master's. And from the first day, I knew he was a person that was going to excel, because he was always so conscientious, and he practiced hard, and he was so dedicated to the music, having gone through some Johnny Hodges and Cannonball and all of those people when he was at Berkeley before he came to Queens College for his master's. And he has stretched out now to be one of the outstanding saxophonists of today. It was always an exchange. You are teaching and you're learning at the same time. It keeps you open and open-minded, and for lack of another word, it probably keeps me young to have all these young guys playing, because they bring out an energy level that I have given up. And when I play with them, they play so hard and so long. I said, well, wait a minute, let me go back. Let me get into this a little deeper myself. So it's a learning and it's a giving experience, learning and teaching at the same time. I think Bird just astonished all of the musicians. He just blew us all away, because he played what we wish we had thought of first. And he had already done it. Every idea he plays, dang, I wish I'd have thought of that.
Running as always. How you feel?
I'm officially a grandpa.
Get out of here.
come in with our part. Then was that right? Then where the rhythm section come in? Now the rhythm section's in now. Is that right? Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, so okay. Let's just start beginning again. So we're kind of shake those dynamics a little bit more, just so we were learning right first.
When I was coming up, like my influences were Jimmy Dorsey, Charlie Barnett, George Yall, Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, and those were the people that I liked. You know? And then finally I heard Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, and I said, "Oh, that changes everything," you know. And I never will forget. I heard them playing Salt Peanuts. And they were playing boom, 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 boom. And I said to myself, I wonder how can they play that fast? And then later, as years went by, and I joined Dizzy Gillespie's quintet, we played it, you know. And a lot of times we would play it, and I'd kind of smile to myself. And the reason being that I was thinking back about that. The thing that affected people so strongly was that it was something that they had never heard. And he did it with such fluency that you know that it had to be right. You see, because some people can do things, and there's an old saying, and forgive me for saying it this way, but it's the only way that I can put it across, and my wife understands very well. There's a saying, you know, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. And that's what's going on musically today with a lot of, especially the things that you hear musically, the singers, and you know what I'm saying, Brett, okay? Anyway, but Charlie Parker was, I mean, the depth of his music, just, I mean, phenomenal. His ideas were great, and no one had ever played that way. As a matter of fact, Dizzy Gillespie told me, he said, it's funny, he said, but when I heard Bird, he said, when I heard Charlie Parker, he said, I said, that's the way the music is supposed to go. Because he was thinking the same way, you see. And so that's why they played so well together, and it was just great.
One time in January, the Laurelards, Louis and Elaine Laurelard, came into my club in 1953, 54, the winter of 53, 54. And they were introduced to me by a professor of English at Boston University, Donald Bourne, who was a very good friend of mine, a great jazz fan. And they just wanted to do something with jazz in the summer in Newport because the summer was dead. Like a lot of places, nothing was happening. And I didn't know whether they wanted to open up a club in Newport or do a series of weekend concerts. But they asked me to come up with some ideas, and Tanglewood was a classical music festival. And I said to myself, why can't jazz have a festival? And I just, in my mind, I created this weekend with seminars and many artists, and Louis Lorillard gave me a $20,000 line of credit at the bank, which I'd never had before 1954. It was a lot of money, and I was scared stiff, but I knew every jazz fan in New England, and I knew if I put together the right, I say because they used to come to my club, so I knew them all, really, or they knew me, or I knew how to reach them. And so I came up with this idea, put these programs together, and next thing I know, we drew 5,000 people a night the first year. And we were off to the races. Jazz is going in 2 or 3 directions at once right now. There's the movement to relate to the history of the music. Wynton Marsalis is like a leader of that music, and I'm very involved with that in my festivals with the Carnegie Hall Jazz Band, the Lincoln Center Jazz Band with Wynton, and that's very important because we can't let the music die. But again, there is the concept of world music and the crossovers that are involved with jazz. We'll have Brazilian groups on this festival. We have Latin groups. You could African groups, and all relating to jazz. Now, how involved they will be, whether the jazz influences them, the different practitioners of world music, or whether world music's influence jazz musicians, we have to find out just where it's going. The other thing is, as I say, that a lot of critics know, and a lot of young people know nothing about the roots of jazz, and they're interested in a lot of avant-garde music, or the equivalent of what we call avant-garde music, where one man can play a tenor saxophone for 45 minutes, and some people like it, but the public in general doesn't relate to it. This is a problem because a lot of young musicians are playing music that is not reaching out. Jazz was always entertainment. The minute it ceases to be entertainment, it becomes a cult, and a cult will not sustain the music. I go back a long way with Jimmy Moody to 1949, and we both remember it. I didn't know him, and he didn't know me, and I was sort of taking a summer in Europe. That was my year abroad. I had one of these student tickets, flew over, and came back in a cargo ship, and $200 round trip, hitchhiking all over Europe. And I started hanging out in the jazz scene in Paris, naturally, when I was there, living in a hotel for $1 a day. I was just like a lot of young people would do, only now maybe by $5 a day now in a hostel. It was 5 o'clock in the morning, never went to bed. And I was in the Arc de Triomphe, and I met this little guy up there, and we started talking, and it was Jimmy Moody. And I said, I came up with Dizzy Gillespie. And he kept me and my friend entertained for like an hour with the funniest stories. I mean, he is so funny, and he was just talking. I can't remember his stories. But we just stood there, and we both remember that night, and that was now 50 years ago. And he remembers it, and I remember it. And I've been friendly with Moody ever since. I ran into him later. I didn't run into him for a few years, but when I ran into him, we remembered that night. And then, of course, he was with Dizzy for years. And I think he was at the first Newport Jazz Festival with Dizzy. And he's worked for me many times. Jimmy Moody's one of the nicest people in jazz. Jimmy Heath is perhaps the most underrated musician that we know. Jimmy was away on a vacation for quite a few years. And so it was sort of the jazz world lost trace of him. And when he came out, he had to start all over again. But he can play, and we've been very close to him. He's written arrangements for the Carnegie Hall Jazz Band. He's done things for me many times. And he's just a brilliant, brilliant musician. And, the Heath brothers, Percy and Jimmy and Tootie, they were a real family, and they've contributed a lot to jazz.